Hey there, I'm Viano, and in this 18th video tutorial on D3 I'll continue with the histogram layout that we created in the last video. And in this part I won't explain every little detail of what I'm doing, since most of it is covered in other videos in this series, but I'll explain the parts that are new. The purpose of this part is to style this histogram up a bit. We covered the basic principles of the layout in the previous video, but we'll append an axis and make use of some scales and just make it a bit prettier in this part. So first of all, let's increase the number of bins so I have some more stuff to play with, and I'll begin by erasing these manual adjustments of the dimensions of the rectangles, since we'll be replacing this with scales. I'll also create some dimensional variables instead of hard coding it. So we'll set the width and height and give it some padding to make room for our axis that we'll create in a minute. So we'll set the width to the width and the height to the height plus padding, again to make room for the axis. So let's begin creating our scales. We can do that down here. So var I, this will be the vertical scale, which plots the height of each bar. And as you probably remember, the height represents the number of values within each interval, so the number of persons that has an age within this interval. So this will go from 0 to, and we could do this manually by looking up the max. So let's console.log our histogram, and I'll show you what I mean. So our array here contains a number of arrays. Each of these are the intervals or the rectangles, and the highest number here is 17, the first range. So we could just say let the domain go from 0 to 17, but we could also do this in a fancier way and a better way, which would be to use the D3 max function, which takes the maximum value of any given array, and we'll supply this with another function the map function returns. So we'll say histogram.data, and this is just bonus material. You can just ignore this if it looks too complicated. So histogram data, and this will be a function that will return the length of each array. So the length property is a property that every array in JavaScript has, and it refers to the number of elements in that array. So what we're doing here essentially is returning the length of each array and handing that over to the D3 max function, which takes the maximum value of that new array that we're handing over to it. So this basically, it has the same function as just writing 0 to 17, but it's computed automatically for us. So, and the range will go from 0 to the height. So let's pass on our data to that scale. Okay, something went wrong. Return length height. Let me pause for 1 second. Oh, I screwed this up. This is not supposed to be data. We're using the map function. So let's refresh. So our Y scale seems to be working good, and we'll continue with the X scale, which plots the range of each bin. So the left border of each bin represents the lower bound of that interval. And the X scale will also be serving as the basis for our horizontal axis that we'll be adding shortly. d3.scale.linear, and the domain will, let's just prepare this. The domain will go from 0 to the maximum age that we have in our data. Since the right border of the outer right rectangle will be furthest to the right in our canvas. So we can just do this d3.max and get the maximum age by calling our map array, which stores the raw array of ages. And the range will be from 0 to the width. And let's pass on our data to those scales. And refresh. Okay, looking good. Ooh, the next thing. Okay, so what if we wanted to flip over this whole visualization? Instead of drawing from the top to the bottom, we want to draw from the bottom to the top. Well, the way to do that is make the Y position function of our data as well. And this is simply, okay, so at this point, if we return 500, what does that mean? It means that each rectangle will be drawn from this line here, 500 pixels down, to the bottom, and but that's not what we want. So let's subtract from this the height for each bar. So we'll say y dy. So what this essentially means is that, okay, for each bar the Y position is 500 down minus the height of the bar. So we're going, let's say it's 200 for one particular bar, up 200 pixels, and then we're setting the height of the bar to the Y property as well, so it goes down 200 pixels for that particular bar. So if we refresh this, we see that the whole all the rectangles are flipped over. Right, so let's add our axis. X-axis will be d3.svg.axis. The scale will be the X scale, and we'll orient this to the bottom. And let's append a group for that. Let's just call it group, and we'll say canvas append G, and then we'll call our x-axis. Let's take a look at this. Okay, so we have our axis here, but we want to move it down. So we'll just transform it, and we'll say translate 0 to the horizontal, and then we'll concatenate the height. So we'll move it down the height, and then like that. Let's take a look at this. Okay, so it's down here, looking good. And we can actually move everything a bit to the right as well. So we'll say attribute transform, and this is to the whole canvas. Translate 20 pixels. Okay, now for the last thing we want to do is to append some text to each bar, so we can see how many values it contains or how many elements it contains. So let's append to the bar group some text, and the x will just imitate the bar's functions here. We'll return x dx, and for the y position we'll return 500 minus y dy, and let's give it a white color so that we can see it. And we'll set the text anchor to middle, and then the actual text will be a function of our data, and we'll return dy, which is the number of elements. Let's save and take a look at that. Okay, so we see that we have, you can see that we have our text here, but it's not in this in the right place. What we need to do is move it down a bit, and that is accomplished by using the dy attribute. So we'll say, let's say 20 pixels, and take a look at that. Okay, but each of these are too much to the left, so we'll move them to the right a bit. So let's set the dx property as well, and since we know that the width of each bar is a function of the dx property or the range, we can, for instance, let the dx attribute be a function of the data, and we'll return the d.dx and divide that by 2 so that we get into the middle. Okay, looking good. So yeah, like I said, I didn't have time to explain all the details here, but most of it has been covered in other videos. But that was the a quick overview of the histogram layout. If you have any questions, please make a comment in the comment section or send me an email, or yeah, I guess those are the options. I'll see you in the next video.